Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Food Fight Show. My name is Nathan Harvey. I'm coming to you live from my home office in Annapolis, Maryland. We've got a great episode lined up for you today. Really interesting, kind of following on some of our recent episodes. Recently, we had an episode that was all about incident management. We've had episodes that are about observability. And so we're going to kind of delve into those topics, but with a real life use case at hand. But before we get into that, I have a couple of announcements. And before we get to those, I would like to say hello to my co-host, Nell Shamrell. Hi, Nell.
Hey Nathan, great to see you. I'm coming to you live from the chef offices in Seattle, Washington.
Awesome. How are they today?
Seems pretty good. I mean, Mondays, people, at least in the engineering department, are moving a little slower, but people seem to be getting a little more lively. So it's a great day to be in the chef offices.
All right. I'll be out there later this week, so I'm looking forward to that. Let's see. So in terms of announcements, the big announcements, of course, is ChefConf. ChefConf is coming up May 22nd through May 25th in Chicago, Illinois. And I recently, now, I don't know if you had this same experience, but I recently went to the ChefConf homepage and it said 18 days and there's this counter that's running. And I got really, really scared. Like May 22nd feels like it's further than 18 days off. And so I had a mini heart attack. And then I stopped for a second and I took a breath and I realized that it was 18 days until early bird pricing ends. So luckily we have a little bit more time before the conference starts. But if you're intending to come to the conference, you have maybe by the time you're listening to this, even less than 18 days to get your ticket and get the best possible price. It's a great conference, 4 days of awesome community, learning, hacking. It's just a great celebration. One of the really cool things, though, that happens at ChefConf each year is we have our awesome community chef awards. And with those, we really take a moment to just recognize folks across the community who are helping the rest of the community be more awesome, whether that's things that they're helping you do with Chef or Inspec or Habitat. Maybe it's someone internal at your company who's helping your own internal community get better with automation. All of these people are awesome candidates for awesome community chef awards. I want to see how many times I can say awesome in 30 seconds. So if you know someone that is eligible, that you would like to nominate, that you would like to thank for the help that they've given you within this community, please go and nominate them. You have to nominate them by the end of next week. And I don't know when you're listening to this, it may already be too late, but hurry up, check the show notes. Go to that link and nominate a person or three that has really helped you level up within the community. All right, well, with that said, what I'd like to do is move on to our topic of the day. So recently, there was a winter storm, and an interesting thing is recently the National Weather Service has been naming all of the storms, much like they do hurricanes. So recently, this winter storm named Toby hit the northeast of the United States. And the part that was impacted includes Baltimore. And on Wednesday, March 21st and 22nd, DevOpsDays Baltimore was scheduled for those 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday. As it turns out, the storm came in overnight Tuesday and into Wednesday. And as a result, we had to pick up and move the conference from Tuesday, Wednesday to Thursday, Friday, from Wednesday, Thursday to Thursday, Friday. And as you can imagine, this move impacted everyone associated with the conference. And so what we thought we would do today is kind of get together with some of the organizers of the conference and walk through just what happened and how did we manage that incident. So before we get into that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So first up, Delali. Delali, would you mind just saying hello, introducing yourself, let our listeners know where you're from, what kind of work you do, and what did you do? What was your part with DevOpsDays Baltimore?
Sure. My name is Delali Jarasa. I'm the president of Fearless Solutions. We're a software firm that like to say we like to build software with a soul. So anything that impacts people in a positive way, we'd like to be a part of that. For DevOpsDays Baltimore for second year with the conference, and I was the chair of the conference.
Awesome. And let's go over to Kevin next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Chung. I manage DevOps and site reliability engineering for Under Armour, global e-commerce. For DevOpsDays Baltimore, I was the logistics chair.
And Megan.
Hey everyone, my name is Megan Butler. I was hoping to go after Delali and say ditto, but I work with Fearless as well. And for DevOps Days Baltimore, I was in charge of a lot of little things that became a lot of big things in the end. So some of the catering, helping out with logistics, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting to think about as the conference gets impacted, like who are the people that are impacted? And when I look at it, I really think about four main constituents or four main customers for our conference. And that was number one, the attendees. Who is it that was going to attend the conference? Right behind them is the speakers. Who do we have lined up to speak at the conference? Followed by the sponsors and then the vendors. And the vendors are different from the sponsors in that the vendors are vendors for the organizing committee. So the folks, for example, that we're purchasing food from or AV or the venue from. So Nell, I know you've been to a couple of DevOps days. I wonder if you could maybe, just for any listener that hasn't been to a DevOps days, give us a sort of overview of what does a DevOps days actually look like?
Certainly, I'd be happy to. So DevOps Days format is kind of a unique format I've found as far as conferences go. But what it is it's 2 days. The first half of the day is speakers, great thought leaders from around the DevOps world. And then the second part is what's called open spaces. And what an open space is, it means that people get in a line with ideas for topics they'd like to talk to other people about. They come up to the microphone, announce that topic, and then we put it on a sticky note. And then that sticky note goes on a wall. And usually we do have more topics than we have sessions available. So what happens next is people vote on what sessions they most want to see and most want to talk about. And then we adjust the schedule fittingly and try to fit as many of those in as we can. The beautiful thing about them is the whole point of open spaces is whoever is there at the time of the discussion, the room where the discussion about the topic is going to be placed or going to be discussed, those are the right people to be there. And if you ever feel like it's not the right place for you, you can easily follow the rule of 2 feet and move. Sorry, I need to turn off notifications. You can easily follow the rule of 2 feet and then go into a different discussion that might be more relevant to you. So it's 2 days of this kind of split format, and it's quite unique, but quite useful, I found.
Yeah, and one of the beautiful things there that you mentioned, Nell, is that the people that are there are the right people. And if you have a conference that has to move a couple of days, maybe some of the attendees can't make it. So good thing that is a principle of open spaces. However, of course, there are lots of other folks that you expect to have at a DevOps Days. As an example, you mentioned the speakers. And of course, we have sponsors that are there as well. So let's just kind of take a walk down memory lane, if you will, and look at the timeline of what happened for DevOps Days Baltimore. And the thing is, it was remember that it was originally scheduled for a Wednesday, Thursday. And so if we go back to Friday the 16th, this is the Friday before the event was meant to happen. This is where we saw the first sort of indication in our internal Baltimore Slack channel for our organizers that maybe something was going to happen. And the message that was posted there, this was at 11 a.m. on Friday the 16th, was, hey, did anyone happen to look at the weather for next week, Tuesday going into Wednesday? It's not supposed to be pretty. So this really was our first indication or our first recognition as a group that maybe we were running into problems. And then as is typically the case, in Slack, there was no immediate response. But about 7 minutes later, Kevin, I think it was you that said, yeah, it's still too early to know, and we'll have to monitor for how it really turns out. And then in parentheses, you said this was the 4th nor'easter and complained about, hey, we've had enough of the cold weather. To me, I think this is kind of telling in that, when an incident happens in your environment, sometimes the way you get alerted to it, you experience alert fatigue. So in our particular case, there had been 3 previous nor'easters that had the potential to bring real weather to us in Baltimore. But really the only thing we had from those was wind. So I think as a committee, we were all kind of suffering from some of that alert fatigue. Delali, Kevin, Megan, do any of you like to comment on sort of what did you think Friday morning?
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, not only was it alert fatigue, when we originally scheduled the conference, keep in mind that Wednesday and Thursday were the start of spring. Wednesday was literally the first day of spring. So we're like, okay, it's going to be spring. We're going to be well past any sort of winter weather. It shouldn't be an issue. So when we initially picked out dates and we're looking at venues, we're like, we should be fine. So that there's a bit of that disbelief that what goes into it with the alert fatigue that, like, is this really happening?
I think
I think there was a sense of disbelief as well. The first year we planned the conference, we were planning around January and said, oh, I think we'd had a particularly bad December. So we said, let's not do January. Time may not work out in case of snow. We picked a February date that I think was postponed because of weather. And we ended up saying, let's just go towards the end of March. Clearly, there'll be no issues at the end of March. And so this was coming off of the heels of pushing it to March specifically to avoid the weather. So I think in addition to alert fatigue, we were kind of just assuming the best at that point.
Megan, you were going to say something.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is if anyone's planned a conference before, in addition to alert fatigue, I think we were all suffering actual fatigue at that point. So we were trying to conserve as much energy as possible going into the conference. Replanning it right before the conference wasn't really in our budget of energy.
I mean, and you raise a really good point there, Megan. I know both you and Delali work at Fearless. Kevin works at Under Armour. I work at Chef. I don't think any one of us are professional event planners. And I see some heads nodding. No, not actual event planners. So yeah. It's fun. What part of the beauty of DevOps Days, I think, is that it is organized by a local group of volunteers. But that also means it's a local group of, maybe amateur at best, maybe novice event planners. The next thing that happened that I find kind of funny in the Slack channel, funny now, maybe it wasn't so funny at the time, but a minute later at 11:08, the question was, do we have access to coat racks at the facility? So yeah, there might be weather, but what about our participants? Where are they going to put their coats? That was pretty good. So then I would say, about a half an hour later, I think it was Delali who said, hey, let's say the agenda does get slammed, or the area gets slammed and the roads aren't drivable. We have the option maybe to move it back one day. Let's hope that the storm passes by with no issues, though. And then some praying hands as an emoji in Slack. Like, please let us not have to move the conference. And that was followed a little bit later by, I think it was you, Kevin, again, who had access to the facilities schedule and said, hey, look, there's nothing public on the schedule. So it's probably available if we have to shift the conference. So Kevin, tell us about what had you done at that time to work with the facility?
Well, that's one of the interesting sort of things that came up during this entire process was our actual facility coordinator actually had a family emergency, so he wasn't available. So I was actually trying to cull information from external sources to try to figure out, is this even an option? We discussed it sort of just as a passing comment, just as far as when we could actually move out some of the load in for the facility. So when our actual table could be moved out, the AV was already planned for Friday, so I knew there wasn't necessarily an event scheduled for that day, but we were trying to coordinate that and figure it out. So that definitely was a challenge.
Yeah, it also clearly relates to what happens to us in the real world when we're fighting incidents, right? You have someone on the team, maybe even the subject matter expert, who for whatever reason is unavailable during that incident. And how do you, it's impossible to plan for that, or it's not easy to plan for that.
My wife worked at a law firm last summer, and their database went down what happened to be on the day of their only sysadmin's mother's funeral. So they did the right thing, I believe, and said, we're just going to shut down for the day because we are not calling this sysadmin on this day. But yeah, those things, they always do happen. And when you don't have your subject matter expert, it's easy to feel lost if there isn't a way to bring them, at least not an ethical way, I guess I would say, to bring in their expertise.
Yeah, another thing that, Kevin, I think you mentioned was that we could watch after the UMBC policy. If the university is delayed, then that would impact us as well. So could you just talk for a minute about where did we host DevOps Days Baltimore and what was its affiliation to the UMBC?
Sure, we hosted it at
before
Columbus
it does,
Center.
that is the same UMBC. You didn't highlight that, Nathan. So I want to make sure that's clear for the record.
That's right.
Yes.
It's the UMBC that was crushed the #1 rank in March Madness. The first time that's ever happened in like 135 years or something ridiculous.
There you go.
Yeah. Go UMBC. Go Retrievers. All right, Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting facility. It's Columbus Center, specifically I think it's the Institute for Maritime Exploration or something like that. IMET is the acronym. So it's a weird facility in that it's associated with the University of Maryland. Our contract is with UMBC, who technically runs the facility. Yet, because it's associated with the University of Maryland system, they actually follow the University of Baltimore's closure schedule, not UMBC, which is out in the county. And then it's also confusing there because there's also a University of Maryland at Baltimore. So even when you're trying to coordinate, like, which facility is it? Is it UMB or is it UMBC? It was just in passing when we were actually preparing for the event and trying to coordinate, when the event coordinator actually got back to us and said, no, we actually follow University of Baltimore's opening policy, not UMBC, where it kind of cut us all for a loop as well.
Yeah, we also have a bunch of organizers that are UMBC alumni, and so we actually have personal, or some of them have personal experience with the university, and the recognition that, look, it's a university; it never closes for weather, so we should be totally fine. Well, so that was Friday, and after we kind of thought about this for a little bit, within I would say 2 hours of us mentioning this, the conversation very quickly moved away from the weather that was coming in and switched over to planning supplies that were required for open spaces. How many Post-its do we need? What size? How many Sharpies, and so forth? And I think we all pretty much said, hey, it's the weekend. As Megan mentioned, we have some fatigue. Like, we've all been working really hard to get ready for next week. We need to save up our energy for next week. So that conversation kind of just disappeared until Monday. Megan, do you remember what happened on Monday morning?
Yeah, I don't. I'm trying to think who. Oh, it was one of our sponsors reached out. So as we said, there were a couple of parts, right? Different people that needed attendees, speakers, sponsors, vendors. So one of the sponsors reached out and kind of said, hey, like, we have travel plans. Are they going to be affected by this weather? Which I know Nathan loves to point out, and I'm happy to. My response was, let me just look at it. Basically, I want to keep ignoring it. It was also 50 degrees that day, so it was very nice outside finally, and we were just hoping we didn't have to deal with it, or I was.
So this is I think, again, classic like incident response. A customer, in this case one of our sponsors, came in and raised the priority of an ongoing incident. You could also look at this and say, Twitter or some other external customer channel alerted us to this incident. Of course, we already knew it was an incident, but we were dutifully ignoring it. But as the priority got raised up by the customer, that became interesting. And then also, like you said, it was 50 degrees. Like, there's no way it's going to snow. It was clearly an improbable, if not impossible, thing that was going to happen. Yeah. So then later that day, sort of, I would say about 20 minutes after the sponsor came to us and we decided that we wanted to keep ignoring it, we came to the realization that we couldn't just keep ignoring it. So we asked again if the facility was available on Friday. That was our first next question. And then there was, Delali, I think you had an idea about getting more data. So what were you thinking at the time, Delali?
So there's just so many pieces. You mentioned all the groups that are affected, from attendees to speakers to vendors to sponsors. And in moving, and any kind of change affects all of them. So we just wanted to make sure before we moved it a day, or if we moved it further out, that we wanted to kind of assess how big the impact would be. And so in order to be able to do that, we needed some more data to make that decision.
Yeah, and so I think that the next decision, or the next way that we gathered that decision, was we asked our sponsors, right? And we asked them,
Yep.
What did we ask them?
So we started off asking, we wanted to know, did it make more sense to push the conference one day? And our assumption was, again, that if the snow came in, it would last for one day and then disappear, because of course that's what we planned. So it should happen that way. Or the other option was, do we push it 1 month, right? And stay clear, because it certainly won't snow in April. So those were the two options. We asked sponsors which of those two they preferred, and if they would be able to make both, one in or both.
Yeah, and I think that as we really started to gather that data, that's where the real incident response started happening. I think the team kind of all started kicking in. We're gathering all these data points from our sponsors. We, of course, had to go to the vendors. And then someone mentioned, hey, we should consider folks that have made travel arrangements and hotel bookings. At which point, Delali, I think you asked how many folks are in that boat. And one of our organizers said, hey, I'm not sure offhand, but later I can definitely find out for you. And how did you feel about that later?
I think at that point, the crisis level was all the way up, and there wasn't time for later. We kind of needed everything as soon as possible. And you mentioned earlier that one of the sponsors had kind of raised the priority. And to clarify what they were asking, they were saying, look, we're about to get on a plane, and we need to know, should we get on that plane, or do we postpone that plane, or do we cancel that trip altogether? And so we really wanted to be as responsible as possible and get folks information as they needed, so they weren't stuck at airports or with a bunch of flight cancellations and things like that. So we had to get the data as quickly as possible so that we can get something out to folks. And I don't know if I said it that politely in the Slack channel, but that's a good summary.
Yeah, well, it was pretty good. Of course, what happened was our primary speaker liaison responded saying, hey, I'm on the road. So he was driving at the time. Again, not dissimilar to what happens in a real incident, right? Someone may be traveling, maybe at a place where they don't have their computer, maybe they only have their cell phone, maybe it's unsafe for them to participate in any communications, like maybe they're driving or something. So I thought that was, again, pretty interesting to see. Yeah, so then, so we asked the sponsors, hey, should we push it a day or should we push it a month? Megan, what was the sponsor, what were sponsor responses like?
So I think to let the listeners understand why that's so important. These are the people who are basically paying for the conference, right? So we needed to know what they were going to do, and if they weren't going to be able to make it, were they going to pull out money that we've basically already paid? So we reached out, and I think it was pretty much a 50-50 split, but it took us a while to get there. So the first few responses said move it to April, and as we got in sort of the next round, it was let's do it a day later. So it was great to have all the information, but not necessarily helpful to making a decision, right?
For sure, and if I recall correctly, the early returns were weighted much more heavily towards push it off a month, not push it off a day.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then we also, as we, in terms of full disclosure, as we looked at those sponsors, we started weighing the sponsor votes, if you will, differently, because there were many levels of sponsorship. There's platinum sponsors, gold sponsors, silver sponsors. And so, unfortunately, this wasn't a democracy. This was the more dollars you put in, the more your vote weighed as we were making that decision. Delali, I think you called me Monday morning also, and we had a brief discussion, right?
Correct. Yeah, I called Nathan and said, what's your thought? Have you dealt with this before? Nathan helps to plan and organize the DC DevOps Days and has been a part of a number of DevOps Days across the country, I think around the world as well. And so I wanted to kind of just get his input offline. Like, what do you think about this? What's your sense? At that point, I think, again, it was early, and most of the sponsors at that point had said push it a day. The other part of that conversation is we reached out in parallel to all the speakers, So we figured, okay, we could have sponsorship, we could have a great conference, but we may not have any speakers there if they can't make it, right? Or those that were originally scheduled for Wednesday could no longer be there Friday, and we had to shuffle the schedule last minute. And so from what we had at that point, which I called Nathan, was speaker said push it a day, sponsor said push it a month. And so we're trying to reconcile between the two of those. And so I just wanted to get his input as we're collecting points to figure out, what we needed to do.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, my response was, the typical, should you carry an umbrella or not? And it was, if we cancel the conference or move it, then it's guaranteed not to snow. And if we do nothing, then it will absolutely snow. And so I was definitely of the mind that we should push it a day, not push it a month.
What was the response from the speakers? Because I'm thinking about, I do quite a bit of speaking. If it's a local conference, it's not that big a deal to shift to a day or two. But if I'm flying from Seattle to the West Coast, or Seattle to the East Coast, it is much more of a burden to try and change that flight at that point. So what response did you get from the speakers?
So I can take one unless anyone else has a thought. But what was interesting about that, we kind of had that thought initially as well. But as we looked at the data, there are people that could only make, let's say, Wednesday. And those that could only make or speak Wednesday, they were out altogether, right? The folks that were in that boat. And then there were folks that could only make Thursday. And so if the leftover folks that were, we needed to speak on Friday couldn't make it, we had to also reshuffle people that were scheduled for Thursday. And so we really had to replan the 2 days and who could make what and who couldn't. And so it was a bit of a mess, right? So people already had their Fridays booked. And so even if they were local, they had meetings, they had other things they had to do. And so it was quite a bit of a scramble, even though it was just a day and a lot of the folks were local.
It sort of was almost worse being local, because it was very easy to not have to plan anywhere around that, right? You had your 2-day conference and you were already going back to work Friday or off. So it's sort of, you think the travel is the hard part. And I think in some ways that was actually the easier part.
Mm.
How about the organizers? Are all of you local, or did some of you have to travel into the Baltimore area?
I think we're all local.
Yeah. Localish. There are some that came from the DC, Northern Virginia area. And I remember talking to some of them. It was, I think, maybe the Tuesday before the storm. And folks were debating, and a couple speakers were in this boat too, should we come up now, or do we try to wait it out and come tonight? Because the storm, I think initially it was supposed to start like afternoon and end in the evening. And then it kept sliding, it kept sliding further back and further back. At some point we told them, like, just, you better come up now. If you're going to make it, come up now, at least get stuck in Baltimore for a couple of days. And so, I think a couple of the organizers were coming from Northern Virginia area, so they tried to get in a little early.
Yeah, I was local, but I actually had a hard stop on Friday. I had a pre-scheduled meeting. And so here we are looking to reschedule the conference. And I remember having to say after, like, okay, we're going to push the conference today. I'm like, well, I won't be able to be there in the morning. So here I am on the hook for logistics. And I felt terrible because I'm like, I actually won't be around. So unfortunately, I want to be there, especially to move the conference. But that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, talk about compounding issues, right? Our main contact at the facility was out with a family emergency. Kevin, you are our main contact from the organizing team at the facility, and then the shift meant that you couldn't be there either. That was certainly interesting. I think the other thing that is interesting, I think, especially for listeners that aren't in sort of the mid-Atlantic Baltimore, DC area, is that this area is actually made up of quite a number of what I would consider microclimates. If we look at just this storm and look across the 10 or so people on the organizing committee, the snowfalls ranged from anywhere from like 2 inches to 18 inches just across the organizing committee, who are all very close, certainly within an hour's drive of the actual conference.
Yeah.
And in terms of being local, like, again, everyone is local, although I had to be in Chicago on Wednesday. So for me, a trip to and from Chicago right before the conference began got more and more problematic as the day went on and the storm really developed. Now, eventually what did happen, though, is I think it was late on Tuesday that the University of Baltimore, which is the university that the facility follows their schedule, they ended up canceling everything the following day. So what that meant was Wednesday, the entire university was shut down, which also meant that the facility was unavailable. Megan, what was your first reaction when that happened?
It was very validating for us. Somebody said at the conference when we did the panel, right, there was sort of a virtual high-fiving happening because we felt like we had, we were validated in making the right call.
Yeah, totally. We all made the right call. There was definitely lots of high-fiving. Of course, we felt bad, but man, it was good that we made that call. And in the end, or earlier, we were able to make that call, around 1 o'clock or so on Monday, which was really good. But this other thing happened that I think again is not dissimilar to other incidents. What happened was we saw the weather start to develop, and as everything shifted, the weather started coming in later and later, but maybe it looked like the impact was going to be better. So it was almost as if we felt like we were out of the woods, and then the incident got even worse. Delali, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so as we looked, it went from a couple inches to 3 inches to 4 inches, and it kept growing and growing and growing. And so we started thinking, okay, good thing we made the call to push before the university closed on Wednesday so we can get the information out. But what if this now impacts Thursday? And so this almost became an incident within an incident, saying, okay, if we were able to kind of get things corralled to push it one day, but what happens? Can we push 2 days? Do we need to push up a month at this point? A Friday to Monday didn't seem like a really good option. We never really threw that on the table. And so we decided, saying, if Thursday was also closed and we couldn't get in the facility, should we do an online conference? So a lot of Tuesday and Wednesday turned into how could we pull the entire day off as an online conference and then reconvene in person on Friday.
Yeah, and luckily it didn't have to come to that. But Dalal, you mentioned in our chat something that I failed to mention. It was about 2:42 on Monday that we made the decision 100%, okay, we're pushing it back by a day. But now that we've decided, there was still lots of work to do. Again, just getting to that decision was a lot of work. But then the real work actually began. So Kevin, what were some of the things that we did immediately following that decision?
If I'm trying to remember, I mean, also it's probably helpful to point out that, in addition to the validation that we all felt, this had wound up being the largest snow that we had received in 2 years in the area. So just so the listeners are kind of aware of the validation that was going through our heads. Yeah, it was a lot of, it was confirming a couple things just in order to shift from a logistics standpoint. Not only do we had some basic hard stops that there's no way that we could pull this off if we don't have access to things. So we knew that the venue was a clear one. If the venue's not available, then all bets are off. We have to push 1 month. But we also had AV. We had a recording vendor for the live streaming and recording that's coming in from out of town. They were literally on a plane, I think, flying in that day. And so it was just reaching out to them, seeing if they could reschedule their flights and would there be flexibility there for moving the dates. As Delali mentioned, even the incident within an incident, we were considering, well, we've already paid or we have all this catering in place. Like, what happens if this goes online, and what do we do with that? Or do we have any recourse for things like any sort of refunds if things go unscheduled? And then we didn't even have a cancellation policy really in place, because immediately what turned around was we were starting getting emails like, what if now that you moved the dates, I can't make it Friday. Can I get a refund? And then I think there was a kind of panic moment, like, wait, where are we financially? What impact will this have? Are we going to suddenly get hit with a flood of refunds and refund requests from attendees? So I don't know if Megan, I know you were dealing with that directly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really quickly established that we needed to have a refund policy that we did not have in place. So we started to try to be really lenient. And those that reached out first, we said, we understand. We didn't want to deal with it either. We'd like to be able to give some money back. So we started to try and do that. And then kind of quickly realized we couldn't do that if everybody came back and said, hey, we need our money back. Just because, unfortunately, when you're 2 days before a conference, you've paid for a lot of it or promised that money somewhere. So it was really just a lot of people were very understanding, which was amazing. And I guess understandably so. But yeah, it was a lot of just kind of holding people off. Hey, we have to see where funds settle at the end of the conference. Thankfully, it's also a very cheap conference. So I think that helped. But yeah, it was definitely a lot of communication around that, right?
I think Nathan pulled an interesting stat where we had been so focused on our sponsors flying in because they were the alert that first, made us think about any travel issues and then also speakers. But then I think Nathan looked at the actual attendees and sort of did a data mapping of what percentage were local versus traveling. And then I think it dawned on us as we had already announced the shift in dates. What if schools are affected and we have parents in the area? And that wasn't something that immediately came to mind. And we're like, oh, is this going to really affect attendance of the conference? Or even as we were trying to figure out
I think he froze.
I think we lost Kevin. Yep. All right. Well.
Yep. I think what he was saying was about as we got more information, I think, and where we got that information from. I believe, Nathan, you had posted in the DevOps Days channel, the global channel, where a lot of the organizers from around the world participate and said, hey, here's what we're going through. Does anyone have any thoughts for us? Has anyone dealt with this before? What should we be considering? And I want to say there was someone there that said, hey, have you thought about parents and that may have to drop kids off late if schools are closed or delayed? And so that's kind of where that piece of information came from. But it was good data. And so we had to, again, we decided to start the conference on time that Thursday, but we did take into account there may be some folks coming in a little bit later.
Yeah, in fact, it is good to call out to that DevOps Days organizer Slack. So we, as a committee, use the local Baltimore tech Slack, but the global DevOps Days organizers all have their own Slack team or workspace, whatever they're called in Slack these days. But so I did go over into that channel and I posted in general asking, has anyone had to deal with this before? And it turned out that a couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, New York City had to deal with it for a hurricane that came in, and they ended up moving from November to January. The hurricane did cause a lot of flooding, and so moving it just a day wasn't actually an option for them. And I'm sure there were other things that weren't available. But then there's Bridget Crumhout in that DevOps Days organizer Slack that said, hey, if attendees' kids are home from school on a snow day, those attendees likely aren't going to be able to attend. And that was definitely a thing that we had to look at. The other thing there is as Kevin mentioned, I just pulled the zip codes from everyone that had registered and plugged them into a website to see sort of where do those folks live. The beauty of having half of the conference be open spaces and the people that show up are the right people is let's make sure that people are going to show up. It would be terrible to lose some speakers. And in the end, we did lose a couple of speakers, mainly because of travel and weather. But you can make a DevOps Days work really well and be a really great experience for everyone, so long as you can have those open spaces, I think.
Something I'm thinking about as we discuss this. My expectation as a speaker, maybe not expectation, but my hope would be that the conference would be communicating information immediately, and if if things that need to be communicated are we don't know what we're going to do yet, or we're waiting for this or this, that's fine as long as there's conversation about it. And what I would probably do as a speaker is say, okay, this point is the point I need to make a decision. If the conference does not have, and I would communicate that to the organizers, if the conference does not have an answer by this point, I'm going to need to make the decision whether I fly out or not, depending on where it is. As an attendee, it would be, I think, the same thing, expecting that kind of communication early, but I also know as long as there's some people at the conference, even if it's a smaller group of people for whatever reason, we've had this happen with meetups a lot when there's been a severe traffic incident in Seattle. Even if it's smaller, I'm not going to say that's better, but it's a different experience where there's still a lot of value. It's much more intimate. You learn everyone's name and such.
Yeah, and I think that we, that we had even some internal debates, and maybe we can talk about this for a minute, Dalali, around how much should we be asking and who should we be asking. Certainly, one of the first things, or one of the first constituents that we asked were our sponsors, followed immediately by our vendors. We knew without the sponsor money and without the venue, like, we wouldn't be able to move forward. But then we did reach out to speakers, and again, I think there was some debate internally around how much do we ask versus tell, how much, like, and when can we reach out and do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at that point, we were really pushing to get as much information out as fast as possible. So at some point, I can't remember what it was, we just created a Google Doc online, a public Google Doc, and kept sending out the link saying, we'll provide updates. You'll see the thread of updates as we have them. And we pushed information that way. And some of it was, we're thinking about a day, we're thinking about a month, we're kind of getting the feedback in. Here's a cancellation policy. We're trying to make a decision by this time, and this is the data that we're waiting for. So we try to be pretty good about that and sending information out through email, through Twitter. And people got them from different mediums. Right? Some people saw a post on a tweet, and that's how they knew it was a delay. We had a new updated graphic with a delay stamp on it. Some people saw that, and so I think people consumed it from a bunch of different ways. But we did really try to over communicate everything that was going on with all the different constituents.
This has also reminded me, DevOps Day Seattle a couple of years ago, the after party was supposed to be at the Chef headquarters, but there was a giant tunneling machine that was maybe going to be under the Chef headquarters. This is Bertha, which if you're a Seattle local listening to this, you know what I'm talking about. But this giant tunneling machine had been stuck for over a year. And then there was a sinkhole, and there was all sorts of issues. So we didn't know exactly when it was going to be under the Chef office, but had to make the call beforehand saying, all right, we don't know if it's going to be under the office. It might be under the office, and we're evacuating the building then. So let's go ahead and make the call now and see about moving the venue. So sometimes you have that luxury, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the communication, we also, I think, as there were a couple of things that we did in terms of communication medium. As Dalali mentioned, there were emails that went out, there were tweets that went out. We changed the logo on the DevOps homepage, but also as organizers, one of the things probably late Monday afternoon was we realized that the back scroll in Slack was getting too complex and too long for anyone to reasonably be able to get caught up quickly. So one of our organizers created a Google Doc that was intended for organizers just to say, all right, here's where we are, current status of vendor A, B, C, sponsor A, B, C, speakers, and so forth, so that you could quickly at a glance get a sense of where we were. And then, as Dalali mentioned, we eventually created a Google Doc that was just public, so anyone involved with the conference could just jump in there, could see where we stood. And then a couple of other things that we did, we had all along been encouraging our attendees to join the local Baltimore Slack team. And I think that as we were sort of figuring out what were we going to do, we had even more incentive for them to join that Baltimore Slack team so they could get into the DevOps Days channel there. But then we also created a private channel for all of our speakers. And so just having the ability and the adaptability to change the communication venues or the communication mediums that we were using, I think really helped us as we walked through that. So I wonder if, Dalali, Kevin, Megan, what were some of the things that you felt really helped us in terms of responding well to this, and or some of the things that really hindered us in terms of responding well to this? Maybe some things that we haven't covered yet.
I think I'll kind of beat this up a little bit, but communication. We had a number of really great chairs that were responsible for different parts of the planning, whether it be the facility and logistics, or catering, or AV, or working with speakers, or working with sponsors. And you can imagine that all of those comms going back and forth, throughout the year can be pretty can inundate your inbox pretty quickly. And so a lot of those conversations were offline, and we come back and we meet weekly and kind of give updates and move tickets across our board as things were getting completed. What we decided during this incident is that we would copy our alias on everything. Everyone would copy the alias on anything going in or out. such that everyone had a pulse of what was going on in each of the different areas at any given point. I thought that was really big. A lot of emails, but I thought that was really big because we could really follow the thread kind of real time. And so if someone had a question, an external person, a speaker, we kind of knew what the last comms were to that particular person, or last comms were about sponsors, or, oh, we knew, hey, Kevin's already working on that, or, hey, we'll have an answer to you in a couple hours. So we could also, I thought that was really helpful.
I think kind of in addition to that, we talked about at the conference. So we've said earlier being local was helpful. I think there were a lot of us who could work face-to-face or just kind of get things done quickly or pass off things quickly. In addition to that, a lot of us had helped with the organizing the first year. And we got to a lot of, we'd gotten through a lot of issues at that point. So like having just that established working relationship, I think helped us really be able to kind of move and work smoothly together.
Yeah, I'll call out that one thing that we didn't have was a dedicated incident commander when we talk about this being an incident. But sort of Delali naturally fell into that role as a leader. He's got that sort of presence and immediately took action. And then there was no questions about who was but we, in a retro, we said that we should formalize the roles as far as like an incident commander. But I think just the organization and the fact that we worked together.
So close.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's it's interesting. You talked about kind of the incident commander, and that kind of goes back to ensuring that we've got a good role. One important piece that we really highlight is a huge takeaway is that as technologists, right, and we're literally putting on an event called DevOps Days that talks about best practices and how to prepare for these kinds of things and ensuring that systems are redundant, all that stuff, and highly available. And so we're really, really good at that on the tech side, but amazingly enough, we're planning this conference and we had zero plan for failure. So this conference was, of course, a conference we planned, 6 months in advance is going to start on time the day we said it was going to start because we said so, right? And so I think that was really, really interesting, the fact that all of the good things that we know to do kind of with our technical hats on, we just completely overlooked when it didn't seem like we were doing something technical, right, as a planning for a conference. And so I thought that was really important to kind of think about how we approach and think about failure, and the fact that just about anything can fail, and how we should have that same technical hat on in that regard as well.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of a testament to the incident command system that FEMA publishes and talks about. It's not about how do you respond to your server when it falls over. The incident command system is about exactly that. How do you manage incidents, right? And it is applicable in every industry, whether you're responding to fires or firefighting, whether you're planning an event, or if something fails in your production environment. And I think that there are also, there are some real classic things, some classic behaviors, both pathologies and good responses that we can see coming out of this particular incident that do apply to, production going down, being unable to serve your customers. And I think for me, it's super interesting to kind of look at how those things work in parallel. And, one of the things that we recommend within the technology space is to have game days. Go in and bring in the chaos monkey and just start breaking stuff in your production environment and see how your team responds. I wouldn't recommend just changing the dates of your conference to see how your team responds. Like, that feels wrong to me in many ways. But maybe if you are organizing a conference, you can learn something from the discussion that we've had here in our experience.
Something else to also remember with incident management in general is the incident management part is never about technology. It's about people. It's about communicating to people. All right, you will be affected by this failure. Here's how. This is why it's happened, or we don't know why it's happening, but we're working on it. That's I think the incident management part of it versus trying to fix the incident. That's usually more technical, but the management part is all about communicating to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Delali, Kevin, Megan, any final thoughts before we wrap up and move to picks?
I don't think so.
All right. Nell, you want to take us into picks?
You bet. So my first pick is a Seattle local pick, which is SakuraCon, which is an annual anime and manga convention. My Naginata dojo was doing a demonstration there, so I stuck around for part of it. And the best thing about it is, even if you're not that into anime or manga, the amount of artwork that's on display and for sale is phenomenal. It's so fun to see all these independent artists bringing their work forward and both exhibiting it and showing it. The other one, this is a show I randomly found on Hulu. It's Forged in Fire, which is the History Channel's version of a reality competition show. And what it is each episode, a bunch of blacksmiths need to create weapons, and they create different historical weapons from different episodes. So you get to learn, you not only see them make it, but get to learn the historical context of it and such. It's really, really interesting. So I recommend that one. And let's go to Delali next.
Sure, I've got 2 picks. My first one is one of my favorite books. It's a book called The Purple Cow by an author named Seth Godin. He's a big marketing person that talks about how brown cows are kind of boring. They all look the same, sound the same. But if you saw an interesting purple cow, you see our purple cow spots back there, and paying homage to Seth here, that you'd stop and pay attention. So just a reminder for folks to be remarkable at what they do. My second pick is, as you're looking for your next place to go visit, go to a conference, or to hang out, I highly recommend Baltimore. We're located in Baltimore, Maryland. It's a great place, and we'd love to host you.
That's awesome. Being a somewhat local to Baltimore, I have to say, every time I'm up there for a conference or a customer meeting, I have that exact same thought, Delali. Like, why aren't there more conferences here? This is especially the Inner Harbor area, like this is it's a vibrant tech community, number one, which we saw at DevOps Days, but also there's a lot of great history and just a lot of great venues that are super interesting. All right, Kevin, how about to you for picks?
All right, so my first pick is, with everything going on with the conference or having an opportunity to travel recently, I really am a big fan of the Shure SE846 earphones. They're in-ear earphones. I've had them for a couple of years now, but I've tried a lot of different ones like noise canceling and so forth. They're just fantastic for just zoning out, really getting into your music. So highly recommend them. A little pricey, but totally worth it. The other pick I'll make is for tonight for the men's national championship. I know there already was a UMBC plug, but as a Michigan guy, I have to root for my alma mater. So go blue.
There you go.
Awesome. How about you, Megan?
Yeah, so I actually only had 1 pick. Well, no, I had 2. So I had my cat sitting here next to me, and he was going to be my pick, but then he started biting my ankle. So I'm slashing that, but his name is Ted, and he's wonderful. We were playing fetch if you saw me throwing things. My other pick is sort of on the lines with Delali. I was going to say Baltimore, but more specifically, I'm a big baseball fan, and I know you all know Camden Yards is kind of the place to be, the first in the new modern stadiums, ballparks. My boss would kick my butt if he knew. My boss at I work part-time at the ballpark. But yeah, so come visit Camden Yards, catch a game when you're out in Baltimore, or just see some of the history. It's a great place to be.
That's awesome. All right, and I have I have a bunch of picks today, so you'll have to bear with me for one moment. So my first pick, actually, they all have a theme that you'll discover very quickly here. My first pick actually goes back to a conference called Monitorama. This was a conference that we tried to have the co-organizer for that conference, Jason Dixon, on this call today, but I'll tell you why he wasn't able to join in just a minute. But Monitorama, during the middle of their conference, had something like a city block-wide blackout. And they had to physically move the conference while it was in flight. And so I thought that would be a great conversation to have with Jason along with this crew. And then I found out that Jason and Delali have known each other for, I don't know, Delali, how long? A long time.
Yeah, so probably over 10 years now.
Yeah, so I thought it would be super cool to get both of you onto a podcast, but unfortunately it couldn't happen. But that brings me to what my pick is. My pick is happy birthday, Jason Dixon. Today is Jason Dixon's birthday, so I want to wish him a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Jason.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
So along a similar line, today also happens to be the birthday of Mark Cornick, who is one of my fellow organizers for DevOps Days DC and was a participant at DevOps Days Baltimore. So happy birthday, Mark. And then last but certainly not least, it is also John Willis's birthday. You might know John Willis as Bachagaloop on Twitter, also for his work on things like the DevOps Handbook and a bunch of other things in the DevOps space. So happy birthday, Jason, John, and Mark. Let's see, I also have two other picks that aren't actually birthdays, but are kind of like birthdays. So about 7 years ago, the first DevOps Day that I participated in, they showed this video, and it was this amazing video, and that was about 7 years ago. The video is called Imagine DevOps, and the creator is a guy named David Lutz. You can find him on Twitter at dlutzy, and I will put a link in the show notes to this video, which is just, it's a beautiful homage to what if, could you imagine what DevOps would be like? Set to Imagine by John Lennon. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. So you should watch that, spend 3 minutes of your time there. And then also another sort of video birthday or video anniversary. Yesterday, minus 3 years. So 3 years ago yesterday, Chef released at ChefConf a video called Eggs 365. And it is a documentation of my adventures learning about continuous delivery with Adam Jacob and Jez Humble. So I'll include a link to that in the show notes as well. Well, Delali, Kevin, Megan, thank you so much for joining us today on the show and sharing your experiences with a conference that got completely interrupted by snow. I hope that anyone out there that's listening, either in the DevOps space or anywhere else, can take some lessons from how we responded to this and apply those to the next event that you're planning, apply those to the next production incident that you're fighting. And until next time, chefs, keep it hot.